Hey, I'm Marian Ryan, the District Attorney in Middlesex County, and I am happy to be here because the Lowell Sun's an important paper, and obviously we do a lot of work. I do a lot of work, particularly in Lowell. So happy to be here, happy to see my friends, meet some new friends, and happy to answer your questions.
Terrific. Mary, when I first met you that day at the Owl Diner, one thing I was impressed with, you told Jim and myself that unlike several of your predecessors who used the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office as a springboard to higher office, you have no plan to do that. You just want to be district attorney. Is that still your feeling, and can you tell us why that is?
It's my feeling because this has been my life's work. This is the work I've done since I was in law school. Aside from raising my two great kids, it is the biggest thing that I've done with my life. I'm absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity to lead that office. We are doing amazing work. We've increased the work that we are doing in terms of the scope of that work in the last 13, 14 months, I guess, since I've been appointed, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity to continue that for a long time.
Okay. Tell us a few examples of the amazing work that you're referring to.
Well, we do, as you know well, we do work in two sort of areas, one which is better known to the public than the other. Obviously, we do the prosecution of cases from the least serious to the most serious cases. We prosecute about 35 to 40,000 cases a year across the district court and the superior court. We are fortunate every year to be able to have a group of new, usually right out of law school or right out of a clerkship, district attorneys who join us to do that work, and we have a strong legacy of doing that piece well. The other, and as you've seen just in the last few weeks, any number of important cases have come in our office. For instance,
which one are you referring to?
No, the whole bus crash this week.
Yep.
You may have seen that. We've had, the rollover on the rollover carjacking on Friday on Route 3, which was a traffic nightmare.
Right?
128, yeah. Which I, had the opportunity to be tied up in traffic for a very long time around. But equally important is the other side of our office, because what we know is that for every one of those cases that we're prosecuting, the fact that we have a case means something's happened. And equally challenging is that opportunity to identify those root causes and do things that can prevent that crime in the first place. And in the Lowell area, we've got a number of examples of that. One of which that I've spent time on for a number of years at this point has been the work with substance abuse. I created the hospital-based task force that meets every 3 months, and it was just recently cited when I testified at the State House on that whole opiate issue as being remarkable because it brings all of the stakeholders. And as I always say about Lowell, one of the things that's interesting here is that Lowell takes care of its own. When there's a problem, people come to that table. I don't have to urge people to be at that meeting every 90 days. Everybody's there. And as a result of that work, we're going to be opening a drug court up here. I think it's June 10th is the opening date, so a couple of weeks. That is something that I've worked on for well over 2 years. That is going to everybody who is a stakeholder in that issue agrees that that's going to make a difference in this area. In the issue of substance abuse, really for a district attorney's office, has to be looked at in a number of ways. We've got to do the enforcement piece, the merchants of the substance that are there. I mean, there are people who are making their livelihood, substantial profit on selling drugs. So we do that. We've had over the last few weeks a case in which we used a wiretap. We were able to make a number of arrests of people moving a substantial amount of heroin. One of those individuals, ironically, was herself a drug counselor. So that's the enforcement piece. We're also looking at the treatment piece. As part of that task force, we worked on getting some of those beds opened up at Tewksbury State Hospital. The drug court is going to be an important piece of that. And what's interesting about that is we've really just been able to do that using resources. The trial court's looking at expanding that, but right now we've kind of just put together a program. We're going to get it started. We will hopefully grow that. As the police would clearly point out, we expect that to have a real impact on sort of the quality of life crimes because that's where we see the biggest impact. Obviously, people with a substance issue are doing the house breaks and the car breaks and so many of those other things. So that's another piece. The treatment option, we work very closely across the county, but particularly up here with the treatment providers, Lowell House and all of those, partnering, getting grants, doing all of that. We did a training a month and a half ago now, I guess, for all of the police and fire departments across the county on the use of Narcan. You know, obviously not a permanent treatment, but certainly gives people that they're able to administer that to.
On that issue for a minute, did you agree with the governor's, with the ban of that drug that the governor put forward and then the court overruled the governor? What was the name? Zohydrin. How did you view that issue?
I think the problem with many of those drugs is what we know is that failure to encapsulate is a real problem. It allows people to access that drug and to do things with the drug, whether it's heating it, smoking it, whatever. It's a very powerful thing. I mean, it's a cost factor to shrink wrap those or whatever it is they do with them.
But did you support the governor's action on that?
I think that that's a piece that was a discussion between the governor and the manufacturers of that piece. You know, that never came to a piece of legislation. It was wrap it?
I understand that, but you're district attorney of the largest county in the state, the most populous. He took a bold move there, and he got slapped down. Did you support that move, yes or no?
I think the proliferation of that drug in our county would not be a good thing.
Okay. You know, and I had planned on getting into some of the drug issues later on, but since we're on them,
sure.
Candy?
Well, no, we editorialized.
I knew you were going to try to get that.
On the point that he was just going down a slippery slope when you start singling out manufacturers,
right.
And you know, and why not Vicodin? Why not other? So he was this one that had not been used in the state. They hadn't even written prescriptions yet for it. So maybe that was his rationale. But at the same time, we saw other ways, maybe by dealing with the manufacturer, to which I think he's trying to do now about the use of the drug.
Right.
So,
you know, obviously any drug that it's part of a piece of another effort that we've made. We've provided every police department that asked us to do that, you know, the drug disposal units where people can come in and drop off prescription drugs. We're concerned about all of those legitimate or prescription drugs that are out and about because people are amazingly resourceful in getting them into a form that they're able to use. So I agree with you in terms of that drug is certainly not the only drug that can be in that problem.
Is this your biggest fight right now? You know, what's the DA's biggest fight right now? Is it opiates and heroin? Is it the Winter Hill gang? I mean, what is it? What's the biggest fight that you have on your hands right now?
I think, as is true across the county, we are dealing with the opiate issue in terms of, as we all know, the deaths from that opiate abuse. That doesn't in any way take us off the focus that we have on so many other things.
Oh no, I'm not saying that, but is that your biggest, you know, is that taking most of your time and most of the court cases?
Most of the issue with the opiates right now, at some level, and what has prompted the outburst is just the deaths and the overdoses. So those are not, we look at those, we go out to all of those unattended deaths. We're obviously trying to be proactive in terms of preventing those situations. That is certainly a piece of our resources is going to that.
When your opponent was here a few weeks ago, he said that there's probably no better office in the state to attack that problem than the individual district attorneys. He said the AG can't do it, the AG has too many other things going on, that it's up to the district attorneys to really attack that problem. Do you agree with that?
As I said, the district attorney, certainly our office, I've looked at that in a multifaceted approach, whether it's the prevention piece, the treatment piece, the education piece, and the emergency response piece. You have to do that.
One last question on this. You know, there are other countries in the world that attack this problem in a completely different way. They view it more through treatment and social services than they do through law enforcement. How do you come down on that argument?
Treatment, you have to have treatment available. I mean, we know, and it has to be treatment that's effective. We know, for instance, when you've done these cases for a long time, when you've seen the same people come back and forth, it's part of the model of the drug court. Treatment has to be available, it has to be effective, and it usually is not going to be something that someone does once. I mean, we know people need to very often use treatment a number of times. So that's an important piece of it. On the other hand, you have to be looking at people, for instance, the case I referenced before, where you've got people that's their life's work, selling drugs. So you've got to be doing an enforcement piece as well. It is a coordinated effort.
Okay. All right, go ahead. Yeah.
Madam District Attorney, I love the title. That's why I'm going to address it. That's how I addressed Martha Coakley. I didn't address Jerry Leone like that, but I think it just adds such substance
last time I
to
thought
the
you were
office.
going to put on boxing gloves when you had him in it.
Yeah, but you know, the leadership has come up. The term leadership has come up quite frequently in this campaign. Certainly, Mr. Sullivan has raised that several times about his leadership. You used the word in your opening statement. And every district attorney puts their imprint on that office. So what does Marian Ryan's leadership, what does that really mean? What is it going to be if you are, like you already started doing it, but what is that notion or that interpretation of your style of leadership? You've mentioned that you would like to, I mean, you're obviously a hard worker, you want to prosecute cases. Some district attorneys have just done high-profile cases. Most of them are high-profile, but it seems like you've showed an inclination to do that more than, or at least thinking about doing that more than your predecessors. So what is that? What is your leadership? How is that going to be both effective and instrumental in that office?
My leadership's informed by, number one, the experience. That's doing this job for 34 years. I started as a student intern. I've done every job on the way up. So I have the opportunity to really grow good prosecutors and to be able to speak to. I know what that's like. I've had that job. I know what you need to do this. I understand that. That to me is important. It's important that you lead from the front. It's important that you have a leader who knows the job, who knows the real challenges. It better informs the way that you make decisions. It better informs the way I tell you to go do something, because I know whether that's practical or not practical. Or if it needs to be done, I know what some of the challenges are going to be in doing that. So that's a piece that I bring to it. The second is I have a passion for this job. It is what I've spent my life doing. People frequently say about the district attorney's office, it's depressing, you see sad things. I regard that, and it's why I've continued to do it. It is a privilege that we have, a rare privilege, to partner with people at what is usually one of the worst moments of their lives. You know, they've lost a family member, they've been physically hurt, they've witnessed something, and particularly when you're prosecuting a serious case, that's a long-term partnership. And to bring people through what is a complicated, difficult, in many ways unfamiliar process, to get them to a just resolution, to get them on the road, hopefully to some healing from whatever it is, that's a privilege. That's something I am committed to. That's something the office is committed to. That's a passion and a commitment that I can transmit to my staff. I have a wonderful staff. I have a wonderful group of prosecutors who come to work. You know, in an industry, as I'm sure the industry is here, they work hard, they work long, they work under difficult conditions, and the constant cry is, can you do a little bit more with a little bit less? And that is a great public service that they do. So that's another piece of it. And then with that experience and perspective and judgment, I am able to really understand and know, as I said, the root causes of crime, the things that are effective. That's what a modern prosecutor's office has to do. It has to be doing its core mission, and it has to be moving forward in so many ways.
Would you change the organization in any way right now, or move resources to any particular bureau or area that you have now, or even consider maybe starting something new, starting a new opiate division or something like that? Are those in the cards at all?
I've made some changes. I'll continue to do that. I mean, for instance, you raise a good point, the very practical piece, the drug court. We've made a commitment as a stakeholder in that we will have prosecutors who that will be their task. So they will be doing that. The nice piece of that, and a part that we've been able to work with some of our other stakeholders is, there is wonderful training available for those prosecutors. You know, they work as a team. The drug court is modeled on a team commitment. Judge, prosecutor, defense attorney, probation officer, and they train that way. So I'm looking forward to that. I've brought to the office something that I have always wanted to have, and was able to help to fashion a group which was successful in obtaining a $100,000 grant a few months ago, and that is to bring a conviction integrity program to our office. It is a way of us looking at our own work. It's a way of being critical of our work and being better, and it is a public safety issue, because the kind of cases that are going to come before a conviction integrity panel are by definition going to be either murders, extraordinarily serious sexual assault, something where someone's gotten a very, very long sentence. And if there's a situation where there's something has gone awry, what we know is if the wrong person has been convicted, the offender has not been. So there's a public safety issue there. So I've been pleased to be able to do that. We've made some hiring as a result of getting that grant, and we're looking forward to, by the fall, having that in a good place.
Will you continue to prosecute cases if you are elected, or, and how does a district attorney choose which ones to do and which?
Well, that's an issue. You know, as you know, I was somewhat different than many of my colleagues in that I was appointed. So when, you know, most people have, well, always, people who run for the office have left the office, put down their cases, and gone out to run, and so those cases carried on, assigned to someone else. You know, in the situation of the appointment, I literally went from being an assistant with all of my cases to being down the hall. Yeah. So, you know, and again, consistent with a commitment to some of those cases, or cases I'd had for a number of years. Very invested with those families, very well versed in the facts and circumstances of those cases. So I am going down on that inventory of cases. I think I've gone from 5 to 2. You know, those cases coming to a conclusion. And I like trying cases. I would like to continue to have a hand in the courtroom, but you have to be mindful of what you just mentioned, is how do you choose what case you get involved in and what is the message of that. So that's something to contemplate.
Marian, we've heard anecdotally on the topic of personnel that there's been a mass exodus of support personnel and ADAs, upwards of 40 or 50 people. Is that true, since you were appointed?
As I say, you know, when you talk about industry, I'm sure the newspaper industry is no different. You have a certain amount of turnover every year. Mm-hmm. Our turnover is really no different than the usual turnover, you know, and again, it goes back to what I said before, and as we've seen that Blue Ribbon Commission that came out a couple of weeks ago, you know, young assistant DAs are paid less than the janitors in the courthouse. So what we see, and this is something I'm very committed to and why I've been supporting the legislation to get that pay raise, is as I said, we're fortunate. Every September, we bring in a class of prosecutors. I am in a position where I could fill that class a couple of times because people want to come do this work. They come with staggering student debt. You know, like a mortgage. We have prosecutors who come with $150,000, $160,000 worth of debt. And they're making $37,500, and, you know, they try for a while. I would say probably 60 or 70% of our new prosecutors are doing something else. They're teaching, they're doing something else, or they've got a family that can be helpful. So they come, we invest a lot of resources in them, we're growing them as good prosecutors, public servants. When they get to the point where that's really taking some ground 3 years, 4 years in, is when now at 30, 31, they want to get married, they want to have a baby, they want to buy a house, and that's incompatible with making $37,000 or $38,000.
But is that number exaggerated? Is that number correct? 40 to 50 people leaving since you've been appointed?
I know that our turnover is consistent with what it has been in other years.
And what is that?
30, 40 people, somewhere in the
Okay.
30s, yeah.
And you attribute that solely to the economics of the office as opposed to your management style?
I think that people, first of all, as in any industry, you have the people who leave for their own, people have a baby, we have a wonderful prosecutor, to give you an anecdote, who was with the state, her husband's been accepted at a law school, up far out of state. She's leaving us. I mean, so we have that piece, but the primary reason, I would say, is just that, that money piece.
Marian, I'd like to read something to you that a former colleague of mine wrote. I wish I could take credit for this because I think it sums up the DA's office perfectly.
Sure.
Among the jobs, this guy wrote this after Leone resigned.
Yep.
Okay, so it was before you were appointed. Among the jobs in public service, district attorney is one of the most relevant and impactful. The DA and his staff, her staff, typically help citizens at their most vulnerable after they or a family member have been victimized by crime. How those people are treated goes a long way toward restoring their self-confidence as well as their faith in government in the justice system. Do you believe that this was upheld by your office in the Remy Martel case?
And with respect to...
Remy and Martel, yes.
You know, we've all seen how that case unfolded. And as I've said, in looking at the events of those couple of days, there's no question. We should have asked the court to hold him. No question. And as a long-term prosecutor, as a human being, as a mother, you can't look at what's happened and not feel the weight of responsibility of that and see the tragedy.
You feel the weight of responsibility for her death? I
feel the weight of responsibility for decisions made by members of my staff. Yes, I take responsibility. I'm the district attorney. I take full responsibility for the decisions my staff makes. And my staff on that morning of August 14th should have asked the judge to hold him. And the tragedy that unfolded, everyone's seen that tragedy. The loss of a lovely woman, a little girl without her mother, parents without their daughter.
I just want, I've met you twice, I think 3 times now. I saw you at a UMass Lowell event as well.
Right.
And on each time I found you to be a very personable, friendly woman. But when I saw you on television in the days after the Martel case, I'm saying, who the heck is that and where is her compassion for that family? And I know you heard those kinds of criticisms from other people as well. Do you wish that you could zero, kind of dial back the clock and respond differently? When this was front page news, a week or so after her killing, and how you personally responded to it, and then the tone of your voice, and how you came across both in newspaper interviews and on television.
I know that I felt then, as I feel now, as a prosecutor, as a mother. It's a terrible tragedy, and if that in some way was not conveyed, yes, of course I regret that, because you cannot do this work. I could not have spent my life doing this work, doing exactly what your friend said, and not...
That was Glenn Johnson by the Boston Globe, by the way, just in case you were curious. Yeah.
It is, it's a great quote.
Yeah.
And not, that's what I do every day, wanting to bring people to that place. And you look at what happened, it's a tragedy. I'm the district attorney, I'm responsible for those decisions that they made, and yet you see how it unfolded and went terribly wrong.
Just one last question. Talking about that case more broadly, not just your handling of it, but the Globe had a great story detailing case after case, several here in Lowell District Court, where judges seemingly just turned a blind eye to this guy. To me, it raised a red flag, not just about the district attorney and the district attorney's operation, but the entire justice system in Middlesex County. Do you share that concern, or do you feel that the entire justice system let her down, not just the DA's office?
I feel the responsibility for our office, for our staff, because that's what I can speak to, and that's what we've spent the last 8 months, 8 months, I guess, looking at, making changes in our office. I'm sure that there will be similar reflections in other agencies. Just given the discussion that this has sparked, I'm sure that is true. It's hard to look at pieces that you see in isolation, but I think one of the legacies of Jennifer Martell for all of us should be that importance of our decision making, the impact of decisions that get made at every single level through that process. And when the awful fact of something going wrong has to cause you to go back and look at what happened and do better, to do everything humanly possible to make sure that never happens again.
You know, this week, I mean, your office deserves credit. I don't exactly know how that worked out, who approached who, but you did spare the state the expense of a trial and the victim's family from more pain with the life sentence and without parole for Jared Remy this week. So that's a good thing. But now, how does your office, the state, and the entire system learn from this and go on from this? I mean, I wrote an editorial for Sunday's paper saying, you know, yeah, I agree this was good that there's no trial, but maybe this is something that the public should have heard, just to spark some outrage in a system that would let this person, victim after victim, just get away with this. And I don't know if there's, I allude to in the editorial, maybe there should be a judges as well as prosecutors and police officers get training in dealing with domestic violence. I don't know if there are any programs, but to connect the dots on these serial abusers and what you do with them. So where do we go with domestic violence? Now, the Herald had a story today saying that since January 1st, 8 people have died. You know, and they didn't say gender, whatever were the reasons, but 8 people have died from domestic violence since January 1st, which I didn't even realize. And that was from the Jane Doe,
yeah, I saw that.
Society organization. So, Madam District Attorney, what do we learn, and what do you think that should be done going forward to deal with all domestic violence cases? And I know, you know, you're right. The decision making, the judgment you have to make in these cases, the first time, the second time, and where do you know, then you have to get serious at some point. Maybe you do it with the first one. I don't know. The first charge. I don't know. It's a tough call.
Right. Well, we've done many things in different ways. Again, sort of taking that multifaceted approach. We've made changes within our own office in terms of the decision making when it comes to bail or asking a judge to hold somebody. So we made a change there. We retrained all of our staff on bail and those considerations. We partnered with the Suffolk District Attorney's Office in November and ran a domestic violence university where we brought national speakers. We had our DAs there for 2 days to be, in some cases, trained initially, in many cases to be retrained on all of those concepts and thoughts and what to weigh, how to do all of those factors. For instance, in Lowell, we do a couple of things. We run the GLEAN, the high risk team. That's a team we put together with a lot of community partners. So when we have a situation, and it may be anything that triggers it, but a situation's been identified as a high risk situation, the team is able to really sort of close ranks around that, provide services, do what needs to get done. It's police, it's providers, it's probation officers. So that is a very effective national model. We've brought that here. We've continued. I've been out numerous times in the last few months, out in the high schools, particularly up here at Greater Lowell and those places. You know, there's an education piece. We're out talking to students about violence in dating situations, you know, which is beginning younger and younger. We're training.
I like what you're doing with the hairdressers.
That is my favorite program. Can I talk about that? That's my favorite program. But let me just finish. But also teaching, I've been doing a lot of school staff training because, you know, it's the school staff in so many cases that sees what's going on in the hallways and what might be violence or threatening in a situation. They're seeing that, so we want them to be alert on that. But the Cut It Out program is one of my favorites. It's a program that I brought to the office in 2009. It began in Alabama. I literally saw it on a TV program one day and thought, we have to do this. We are the only office in the state using this program. We have now been using it for about almost 2 years, a little over 2 years maybe. We've trained over 3,000 people. It is modeled on the concept, and I love this piece of it, because I think part of our doing more with less is bringing more of the community in to be helpful to us. And the theory of this program is that one of the individuals that a victim, not always female obviously, but most often in this situation a female, will tell about domestic violence when she won't tell anyone else, is their salon professional. And there's sort of a lot of reasons for that, but I think there's two really simple takeaways from it. One of which is, we know that many of the injuries inflicted in domestic violence cases, because they're about power and humiliation, are injuries that might not be readily apparent. So the tearing out of clumps of hair, infliction of damage to the sort of torso, the upper body, the strangulation that gives you those tiny little petechiae, the little red marks in your eyes. Those are things that any one of us might well be sitting in the same room with, and I don't see those. Someone who's working on you right up and close to you, or maybe you're saying, put your head back in the sink, and you're wincing because you've had a knee on your back or something like that. So we know that salon professionals see those. We want them to really do three things. We want them to know what things are they might be looking for. If someone makes a disclosure to them, we want them to know how to react. And thirdly, we want them, if someone makes a disclosure, we want them to know what's available. We don't want them to go out and put themselves in harm's way or confront the abuser or anything. This is about being able to provide resources. Because the other reason I think this really works, and this is such a common sense reason, you know, if I had to tell you something terribly painful about myself, one of the things I'd probably most be worried about is watching your expression while I'm telling you. You know, you're telling your mother, for instance, she's crying, whatever it is. When you're with a salon professional, think about, first of all, it's one of the few things you can't multitask, because now I've got my hands on your hair, I'm cutting your hair, I'm shaving you, I'm doing whatever. And the second piece is, I'm usually behind you. So while I'm disclosing, I'm not watching your face. And every time we do that training, people who've been salon professionals for 30 or 40 years will say, I've had 10 people, I've had lots of people. I've had lots of people I've been suspicious about because of the injuries I would see. So we've done this program in 3 phases. The first phase was, we went to the vocational schools and they'd have a cosmetology program. And we trained those students. One of the things that was amazing was, we go in, now these are high school age kids. I do the training, I talk to them for an hour or so about domestic violence, and I usually begin by saying, how many people in this room know someone or have been in this situation? No matter where I go in the school across the county, 95 to 99% of the people raise their hand. So these kids know about this stuff. They're seeing it in their friends and their family. We do that piece of it. We then bring survivors from the nearby shelters to the school, and they get provided really a day of beauty by the cosmetology students. The retail students help us make business clothing available for them so they can go on a job interview, they can advocate for their kids at school, and then the culinary students serve lunch to them. If you think about somebody who's left their family because of a domestic violence situation, you know, and is in a shelter, that opportunity to get their hair done, you know how much better you feel about that? To sit and have a nice lunch is something they've given up. So it's amazing.
But do they, so that person who cuts the hair, are they in turn directed to notify, no?
They're not a mandated reporter,
Okay.
but what we want them to know is how to respond. And also, if someone says something, it's nice to say, gee, I feel badly. It's more effective for me to be able to say, I feel badly, and here are some materials from the local shelter. Those might be helpful to you.
Has your training led to any prosecutions or arrests or anything like that?
Well, we know that what's interesting, because when we moved it out of the schools, we went to the adult training schools like Empire over here, and then we've gone into the private salons. The private salons tell us that the materials disappear overnight, that people ask questions about the material. So it would, you know, I don't know that we're going to be able to say that's why I went to the police station, but we know that that material is going out there, and we're moving across the county, putting it in different communities. It's so well received. It's something, you know, aside from a salon making their staff available to us for an hour or so, it doesn't cost them something. Yeah, but it greatly increases the number of people we can impact.
No, in my reading up on domestic violence, okay, I've come to realize that a majority of the cases are incited because of usually the children. Shared parenting. There's a shared parenting piece of legislation before in the state legislature now, and I know some people are saying that you know they fight or they argue over the kids, and when they're divorced, when they're divorced. Okay, there's more cases where they're divorced parents,
right.
and it creates you know, some of these tragedies. Now, from what I understand of shared parenting, it would be left up to the judge's discretion to sign both parents onto an agreement that they share equally with the upkeep, the keeping of the child, taking them to events and stuff like that, having them on weekends. So it's more like a 50-50 split than what it is, where most of the time now it goes with the mother. Most of the time a child is left with the mother. Unless the mother's proved to be unfit, but most of the time the mother has custodial rights of the child. What are your viewpoints on that? Have you seen the shared parenting legislation?
I know the concept. You know, I know the idea. I know the probate court, like so many other of the courts, and that is a specialty court, is looking for ways to address some of these issues. I mean, I think custody has become a much more fluid kind of situation than it was for many years. The courts will entertain many different kind of arrangements. People traveling for jobs or those sorts of things, you know, make the traditional custody arrangements we're used to different. Shared parenting is one of those. You know, I know that the nesting, where they maintain the family home and the parents trade off and the kids stay in the same home. You know, that's another concept that's getting a lot of traction in the probate court. So I think that's a way to address all of those issues. You know, I'm sure there are domestic violence cases triggered by that, but then you look at the teen dating violence that we see. You know, there's or the growing number, and this is something people don't want to really look at. I spent 18 years running our elder and disabled unit. We have an enormous amount of domestic violence in elder situation with an elder victim, whether in domestic violence in the broadest situation, so not always spousal abuse. Very often an adult child who's come back into the house and is then abusive to their parent.
I'd like to ask you about the Brame case here in Lowell. You were asked to do an independent investigation. You did. You determined that there were no police officers who could be held criminally responsible. What happened, in your view, what happened that night? Where did the Lowell Police Department break down that led to the death of this woman? And as a follow-up, the police chief has recommended that 2 officers be fired and 1 or 2 others be demoted. What's your reaction to those punishments? Do you think that they're over the top, or maybe perhaps they should be a little bit more lenient?
That's an ongoing case in terms of whatever the disciplinary hearings were, and obviously we weren't a party to that, so I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know what the evidence was with respect to those particular individuals. As I understood, it was a 3-panel hearing officer panel that heard that evidence. Yeah, so I don't know what they heard.
That's fair enough.
Yeah,
but you're certainly familiar with the case. What happened that night? Do you think that could have been prevented?
I think that should that situation have occurred? Obviously not. Again, a situation where you see what happened, you watch that video, it's terrible, it's tragic. Our focus was on, was there an individual who bore criminal responsibility for those actions that evening? And that was not the case. There was no particular individual whose conduct met that standard. So that's really our focus. You know, I think there's a lot of, one of the things that I know our chiefs have been looking at is things like a regional lockup, that sort of thing, where you have, instead of individual police stations having 3 cells, 2 cells, whatever they might have, you'd have a regional facility. That's something the sheriff has been talking to the chiefs about. That is one way where you have a much more highly trained staff, that's their job to run a lockup
But do you feel
facility.
confident in saying where things broke down that night in the Lowell Police Department?
I feel confident in the piece of that incident which our office looked at, because I don't have access to everything else. Our office looked at certain materials with a certain question before it and reached a result, and I'm very confident in that.
All right. You know, the other side claims that you don't want to be on the same stage as he does, the Mike Sullivan. You know, I wrote a story a couple of weeks ago about your attendance at the Dave Nangle fundraiser as opposed to that event in Newton where he was and where the AG candidates were, and Katusian was there as well. Are you afraid of being with him on stage, or is that just fabricated?
As I said earlier, first of all, I'm a person of my word. As you know, I love to come to Lowell. Dave Nangle's been a great supporter of mine. I had a commitment that evening, and in an earlier commitment and then that commitment, and I honored that commitment. And we've already covered the issue of I'm happy to come to a Lowell Sun event.
I agree. Yeah.
What have you learned during the campaign so far? It's your first time running for election. How has it gone for you so far? It's still early.
Yep. Two things that are interesting to me. One is the being out and meeting people and talking about the issues and, you know, letting them know who I am and how the office is. That's in many ways very similar to what I've been doing for years. You know, particularly in the last 8 years or so as the office general counsel, I was in many ways the public face of the office, being out running these programs, doing these trainings. So that's not different. What has been very nice for me is I'm proud of the work we do. We do good work. I have a wonderful staff. And to have the opportunity to educate people a little bit, not just on what they know we do, this prosecution, but on all of these other programs. I mean, for instance, Cut It Out. People love Cut It Out. But nobody really knows that side of the DA's office. So the opportunity to go out and talk to people about that has been wonderful.
You know, sometimes when you look at things, you know, you step back and you look at all the district attorney's offices across the state. What is it, 11?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, 11. And everybody is battling resources, limited resources. And I said to myself, but they're all yet state employees, working public servants for the betterment of the Commonwealth. What is it? Why can't district attorneys share resources, or is that taking place? I mean, why, you know, Middlesex, you know, you got the most cases. You just said 40,000. I mean, cases a year. That's astronomical. Right. And yet, you know, either it's a training ground for new prosecutors, but you know, you want justice done, you want it done right. I mean, why are there these boundaries? These I know it's all based on money and revenues and stuff, but it seems like there would be in the 21st century a little more collaboration. I mean, we have a sister newspaper. We share resources. If we have a big news event breaking in Fitchburg, they only got a staff of 5. We send down a couple of reporters, you know,
right,
to help them out. You know, does that take place?
Oh, yes, yes.
Oh, it does.
Very much.
Okay,
I mean,
so
as
I
I
stand
mentioned,
corrected.
no, as I mentioned before, you know, we partnered with Suffolk DA's office to run that domestic violence training. We, in doing our Narcan training, had used some of the materials developed by the Norfolk DA's. You know, so there's a lot of that sharing. Emails made that incredibly easy. Even to people when they're prosecuting a case and an issue comes up. I find out that Jim Campanini is going to testify about something. It's a very routine thing that I would consult with others and say, you know, do you know this person? Can you help me prepare for this? That sort of thing. Or I need to find something. Can someone help me find that? So there's a lot of that kind of sharing that goes on between offices.
Does the DA's office create experts or people of expertise? Like, do you have people for identity theft or the deal on, or is everybody basically a generalist? Is that how it
With
works?
the except,
I mean, except for Chris, he's the expert on everything.
oh,
in our
you mean, do we have
office.
experts within our office?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. We have, everybody starts in a district, the majority of people start in a district court where they're doing a general caseload, and then they work their way up to the Superior Court, again, initially doing a general collection of breaking and enterings and drug cases and that sort of thing. And as people get to a certain experience level, if people express an interest, for instance, in child abuse, in cyber kinds of crimes, we have opportunities for people to do that. And then a lot of what tends to happen is, I'm sure is the case here as well, even if there's not a particular track for you to be doing something, you tend to do more of something you like. You know, you tend to write more of the particular kind of story that you might like or something, I'm sure, just because you're interested in that. You kind of gravitate to that.
Speaking of cybercrime, I'm going to test you.
Yes?
Do you know the status of the case involving Dave St. Hilaire? Remember, he was, and it was prosecuted by your ADA Solar,
Yes.
who was from
Yeah.
the cybercrime unit.
Yeah.
He was the guy, the former building inspector in Lowell, that was accused of swindling the old lady out of her house, having her sign
Yes.
papers on her
Yes.
deathbed.
Yeah.
And the trial judge found that he broke a law, but he didn't break as many laws as the DA had initially, prosecuted him for. Now it's in the hands of the SJC, isn't it?
It's on appeal. I'm not
Yeah.
certain if it's at the appeals court of the SJC, but I know it's on appeal.
Yeah, I gotta check that.
Yeah.
When you said cybercrime, that
Yeah.
just jogged my memory.
Well, before he interrupted me, I was going to ask,
Yeah, really.
in your view, if you had more funding, where do you see the biggest trend now, the new biggest trend developing, and where would you pack the resources if you could? If someone was to give you an extra $1 million for your office, I mean, is there any particular crime fighting unit or prosecutorial bureau that you would put it into? Is there any, or would you split it up in a couple ways? I mean, where's the next wave coming from? Do you see it, or is it, I don't know, identity theft, the child abuse? I mean, where?
It's all of those things, unfortunately. I mean, obviously, domestic violence, we can always use a lot of resources in that. Our child protection unit, which handles so many cases, and in particular now we have that overlap between cyber cases and child predators. So that's an enormous piece for us, both in terms, and we look at that both in terms of prosecution and prevention. The drug piece, we obviously want to be looking at that enforcement piece. And then we have our prevention side. We run, as you know, the CBJ programs in the school, the MPY, that's our, so we use some of our resources for those. So if I got an extra $1 million, I would have no shortage of places I could put that money.
Go back to Campy's point when he was talking about Martell. He mentioned, would be curious to know how that came about. Who can you talk about that? Who put the offer on the table for a plea?
As I think the judge indicated last week, she had a conference.
Oh, okay.
2 weeks ago, maybe
Okay,
now.
yeah.
They began having conversations.
Okay, but how does that work? Does the DA approach?
It can work a
the
number of
defense?
ways. It can work.
And how did it work in this case?
In this case, I don't know the details of this one, like who initially raised the first. I mean, as you may have seen, Mr. Ryan mentioned it the other day that at some point he had made an overture about something and didn't follow up on that. And it's usually sort of a number of you're working hard on getting a case ready. You're seeing each other all the time. You're seeing the judge. Those conversations occur.
But here you had nothing to give.
We had nothing to give. It wasn't a
Right.
deal in any
Maximum,
way. He
yeah.
didn't get anything. Yeah.
Now, House Speaker DeLeo came out with this new proposal for gun legislation, and I found it interesting. I mean, I think he's trying to do what is the right thing, but what the only piece that really was of concern to me and some other people is this suitability factor. Everybody, this word is. It's easy to say, but then when you start attaching who's suitable to have a gun and who isn't, now you could be infringing upon people's rights. I mean, what did you think about that piece of legislation? And I know one of the, it's interesting because in the state attorney general's race, Warren Tolman is pushing the trigger signature, the fingerprint, okay, and Maura Healey's pushing the suitability aspect. So they're both, even though they think that both pieces should be in, but they think those are the priorities. They put that separate priorities. So where do you stand on, did you review that legislation? You were probably involved in it.
And what I'm pleased about the Speaker's legislation is I think for a very long time we've had these tragedies unfold where in hindsight you say, here's a person with a documented mental health history or a sort of a series of events that anyone looking at would say we probably should not allow this individual to have access to guns. And yet we haven't been willing to talk about that. We really haven't. We haven't been willing. And I think it is, as you say, defining what's suitable, defining how long ago the mental health issue might have occurred. You know, if you have a mental health issue, does that mean never? We're gonna have to work that out as we do with every piece of legislation. I'm encouraged that we're starting to have the conversation, because for a long time we haven't had that conversation. That just wasn't something that was a fact, or people were willing to look at as a factor in whether or not you'd have access to a gun.
What was amazing about that was I couldn't believe that police chiefs didn't have the discretion for a background check.
Right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, that's been a study. See, but that's you exactly make my point. That's the kind of thing that the average person reads that or hears that and thinks, of course you have to have that. But we don't, and it hasn't really gotten a lot of discussion or traction in terms of where that's gone. So I'm encouraged that by the Speaker pushing this legislation, which, you know, will, like any piece of legislation, will get reshaped along the way, but it will cause people to talk about it at different levels and bring different people to the table, and we'll get to some resolution.
But you know, the most recent mass shooting in Santa Barbara, there was one of the victims' a father has been particularly outspoken. The fellow with the great beard.
Yes, yeah, I saw him a little bit, yeah.
But yet this guy, the suspect in that case, all his guns were legal, were they not?
Yeah. Sure.
So then the question is, and one of my colleagues suggested I ask you about this, the the state closing down facilities for people who have mental illness. How much of that is a problem in crime today? The deinstitutionalization of certain people who are on the street and make these decisions. I mean, this guy had all legal guns, but he was obviously nuts. So how can you stop someone like that?
Well, it's a problem in a bigger scope, because in the move to what we have seen is in the move for many people who were deinstitutionalized, appropriate agency. For instance, the agency that ran the facility they were previously in. But that hasn't happened in many cases. So you've had people who are out, not in an institution, and not accessing because of budget, because of their own inability to get to a place, because of many situations, they're just not getting those services. So it hasn't just led to the circumstance, although there are those that you talk about, where somebody's out and their mental health issues are not being addressed, and they get themselves into a problem. We see, and I saw for years as the head of that unit, they also fall victim to lots of things. So you have people who aren't able to get the proper services or aren't receiving the proper services for their mental health issue, and they're very vulnerable. And they are easy prey for lots of different kind of crimes. So it's had an impact on both sides. And again, it's just because we haven't, there was a mandate to move people out, but that only worked if they were going to be met on the sidewalk with good services. And there are good services. There are some people who receive amazing services in the community, but we don't necessarily have enough of those.
Very good. Do I get the last question?
What, is it going to be about wine?
No.
I don't know anything about
One
that.
of the other questions that
He
came
does.
up, I don't know, does the DA's office ever use wiretaps?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Mr. Tolman brought up in the forum that the state's wiretapping laws haven't been updated since 1968, and they originally set up to look into organized crime.
Yeah.
Okay, which I just found fascinating, and also why haven't we with all the terrorism? So would you advocate for that? And the question I put to him was I mean, how do you change the wiretapping laws and continue to respect the privacy of individuals who sometimes get snared into these things? So.
There is some legislation that's pending to change definitions. For instance, there's been a movement by some law enforcement officials to include a definition that would encompass gang activity as well. So, that kind of thing. So that's all been pending. And the other piece of it is that the use of a wiretap is, in Massachusetts, the statutes are very closely regulate that use, very closely regulate the reporting back. The other factor is it's a very costly thing to do. So
It comes out of your budget?
yeah, yeah. And
What is that, overtime and stuff? How is
yeah,
that?
yeah, everything, yeah. So that's the decision to use a wiretap, which is sometimes appropriate, isn't made lightly. And it's something that you have to be very circumspect in terms of where you're going, what you're doing, if for no other reason, and it's not the only reason, obviously, but because of they're incredibly expensive.
Does the judge have to approve that?
Yes,
Yeah.
at every
Yeah.
stage, and it's not you get you get an initial opportunity to have it, and then you're at a regular, very
Well, you
short
gotta prove it, right?
reporting.
But the way that
Yeah.
the statute is set now, because when he said it was set up for, to basically look into organized crime, does that mean if someone got a tip on terrorism right now, or some, that you would have to go through any other particular, procedure to get that wiretap set up? Or?
No, I wouldn't necessarily
Okay.
foreclose it, but you have to, the wiretap statute is a very strictly construed statute. You have to very closely, very closely follow what it sets out, and you're constrained in what you can ask for and what the judge will permit you to listen to and that sort of thing.
Good. Well, Madam District Attorney, I thank you for coming to the Sun, sharing your thoughts and ideas with us today, and I wish you very, very well on the campaign trail.
Thank you for having me, I enjoyed it, thank you.
Marian.